Hi, my name's Calder, and 5 minutes was all I got. 5 minutes to pack up 8 years of my life before my billionaire father-in-law dragged me in front of 33 executives. My wife, she didn't say a word, but what they didn't know, silence cuts both ways. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just said, thank you. And when I walked out, 33 people followed. Now the empire's cracking, and they're not ready for what comes next. It was a crisp autumn evening in Chicago, the kind that made your bones ache a little and your breath linger in the air. Seraphine sat beside me in the car, her face lit faintly by the dashboard glow, scrolling through her phone like it held more comfort than I ever had. We were almost there, the Halden estate. I'd been to this house 100 times, maybe more, in the 8 years we'd been married. Yet every time we pulled into that stone-paved circular driveway beneath those grand columns and over-polished lanterns, I felt like I didn't belong, like I was a guest who'd overstayed. The butler greeted us with that same tight smile, ushering us inside like we were just another two faces among many. Seraphine didn't take my hand. She never did when we walked through those doors. Inside, the place smelled of aged wood, leather, and something too expensive for me to name. Mahogany paneling framed every inch of the hallway. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings like frost ready to fall. Everything whispered wealth, power, and something colder. As we stepped into the grand dining room, the low hum of conversation dropped by half a beat. Heads turned. Smiles froze into polite shapes. Mortimer Halden, my father-in-law and king of this empire, stood at the head of the long walnut table. Calder, he nodded with a smirk, eyes already flicking past me to someone more important. But it wasn't the lack of warmth that made me pause. It was the place card. Every seat was perfectly set, names etched in gold calligraphy on thick parchment. Near the center sat Seraphine, right between her sister Alondra and her uncle Mitchell, both senior executives at Halden Holdings. My name? It wasn't at her side. It was all the way at the end of the table, the literal end, next to the swinging kitchen door, where servers bustled in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres and wine. My name was scribbled in a careless scrawl, Calvin, not Calder, Calvin. Mortimer met my eyes across the room, one eyebrow raised as if daring me to say something. Seraphine saw it too. Her gaze flickered to my card, then down to her lap. She said nothing. I swallowed whatever protest had started rising in my throat and took the walk of shame down the length of the table. A few heads turned back to their conversations. Some didn't bother hiding their amusement. I slid into the seat, the leather cushion cold against my back. A server brushed past behind me, nearly bumping my chair with a tray of lamb medallions. The door flapped open and shut every 2 minutes, sending drafts against my neck. Dinner began. Laughter bubbled from the upper half of the table, Mortimer cracking jokes, Alondra chiming in with business anecdotes, conversations about mergers, acquisitions, private flights. I knew these deals. I'd worked behind the scenes on half of them. But tonight, I was invisible. No one looked my way. No one asked me a question. My name, wrong as it was never spoken aloud. Halfway through the meal, Mortimer leaned back in his chair and glanced toward me. "You know, Calvin," he said with a chuckle, "why don't you give the staff a hand and help pass the wine?" A hush fell over the table. I blinked. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But the way his lips curved, the satisfied stillness on Seraphine's face, it was intentional. I looked at her, waiting, hoping. But she didn't even raise her eyes. So, I stood up. One of the staff, a young guy maybe in his 20s, handed me a silver tray with wine glasses. I took it without a word. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. As I walked the perimeter of the table, offering glasses, a voice somewhere near the center joked, "Oh, I thought he was one of the servers." A ripple of laughter followed, the kind that stings more than it echoes. Not cruel, just casual, dismissive. I didn't flinch, didn't break stride. I handed Mortimer a glass. He held it up, smirk still on his lips. "Thanks, son-in-law." No one at that table saw me clench my jaw. No one saw the way my fingers curled ever so slightly around the edge of the tray before I set it down on a side table. Except Seraphine. She caught my eye for half a second, just long enough to know she'd seen it all. And still, said nothing. The rest of the evening blurred. Voices, silverware, wine. I nodded where expected, smiled when it wouldn't matter. My seat next to the kitchen became a symbol, a message. You don't belong. You never did. We walked out of there like strangers. She didn't take my arm. I didn't offer it. The car ride was silent, except for the low hum of tires on asphalt. That night, as we walked the long hallway toward the guest room we'd been assigned, yes, guest room in the house of my own in-laws, I passed by the massive family portrait near the stairs. 3 generations of Haldens. Mortimer, Alondra, uncles, cousins, Seraphine in her college gown, even the damn golden retriever. But not me, not even in the background. It was like I'd never existed. And I didn't go straight to the lounge with the rest of them. My shoes were still damp from the drizzle outside, and every step echoed against the marble floor like I was walking through a museum after closing time. The long hallway was empty, except for the portraits that stared back at me. Halden faces from every era, framed in gold, oil-painted expressions frozen in pride. My own reflection floated faintly in the glass, but there was no place for me on these walls. From the end of the corridor, muffled voices and applause rolled out from the lounge. Mortimer's baritone cut through, steady and rehearsed. I edged closer to the archway and caught a glimpse of the big screen mounted above the fireplace. They were playing a corporate anniversary video. Bright clips of ribbon cuttings, stock charts rising, charity galas. I'd spent nights preparing those very deals, sometimes working until dawn, while Seraphine slept in our townhouse. And yet, as the voiceover rolled, the credits went elsewhere. Lyanna Halden spearheaded our Midwest expansion, Mortimer's voice carried. The footage showed my slides, my maps, my spreadsheets, but not me. My name didn't flash on the screen even once. Applause erupted. Glasses clinked. Someone called out, "That's our girl," and laughter followed like a toast. I felt my chest tighten, a low pressure that started behind my ribs and pushed outward. I backed away from the archway before anyone could see me standing there. My eyes drifted to a massive framed photo across the hall, the 10-year anniversary gala. I remembered that night vividly. I had stood right next to Mortimer in the center, one hand on his shoulder for the photographer, my other arm behind Seraphine's back, but here in this frame there was only empty space where I'd been. They had cropped me out so cleanly you'd never know I'd stood there at all, except for a ghost of my shoulder, a sliver of my jacket sleeve at the edge of the image. 2 junior executives came down the hallway, laughing softly between themselves. One of them glanced at the photo and tilted his head. "Wasn't he there?" he whispered. "Maybe he wasn't important enough," the other replied with a shrug, and they kept walking without looking at me. I moved closer to the frame, close enough for my breath to fog the glass. My fingertips brushed the edge. The chill of it grounded me. It felt like touching a gravestone. 8 years of work, midnight negotiations, last-minute flights, sacrificed weekends, all erased with one cut of a photo, one edit of a video. To them, I was a shadow, not a person. Seraphine's heels clicked softly against the floor as she came out of the lounge. She slowed when she saw me, then quickened her pace, eyes fixed ahead. Not even a glance at the photo. Not even at me. Her perfume lingered a moment after she passed, then vanished. I stood there alone, the applause from the lounge now faint and tinny in the distance. The weight in my chest shifted from disbelief to something heavier, something that sat lower in the gut. It wasn't just being overlooked tonight. It was a systematic rewriting of history, a power play I hadn't recognized until it was too late. I let my hand fall from the glass. My reflection stared back, small and dim in the ornate frame. 8 years, and with one decision, I was gone. I turned away from the portrait, my steps slow but deliberate. Down the hall, Mortimer's laughter rose again, sharp as a blade. In that sound was a message. We can erase you, and you can't stop it. But I didn't speak. Not yet. My silence wasn't surrender. It was a line I was drawing inside myself, a place to store what they'd done. The worst cut, I realized as I reached the end of the hall, would not come from the boardroom or the portraits. It would come from a voice I had loved most. I made my way upstairs, away from the fading noise of the lounge, the chatter, the toasts, the laughter, still echoing faintly behind me like the clinking of empty glasses. I needed quiet, just for a moment. The soft carpet muted my steps as I reached the landing. The hallway light overhead flickered once, then steadied. casting everything in that dim yellow tone that made the walls feel closer than they were. I kept walking, passing closed guest room doors, all identical, all hollow. My fingers grazed the railing as I went, not because I needed balance, but to remind myself I was still there, still part of this house, at least physically. Emotionally, that was unraveling. Just one more night, I muttered to myself. Keep calm. Survive the weekend. That was the bargain. Don't react. Don't give Mortimer what he wanted. A scene. Just grit your teeth, nod when spoken to, and get through it. By Monday, we'd be gone. But halfway down the hallway, someone called my name. Calder? I turned. It was one of Mortimer's friends, a man whose name I could never remember. Just that he'd made a fortune in real estate and had teeth too white for his age. He was holding a tumbler of scotch and had that lazy grin of someone who'd never worried about being left out of a photo. He took a slow sip. So, what exactly do you do here, Calder? Besides marrying into the family, of course. Two men behind him chuckled. One pretended to cough into his drink. I stood there, hands at my sides, the skin behind my ears flushing hot. I gave him the kind of smile you reserve for customer service. I stay out of the way. It seems to please everyone. He let out a short laugh, then turned back toward the lounge, content with his little dig. As I moved past them, trying not to let the moment stick, Seraphine appeared from the hallway across. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, then darted away. She didn't stop. Just walked past me, clutching her shawl like the chill in the air was the only thing bothering her. No defense, no acknowledgement, nothing. I reached the end of the hall, stopped in front of the guest room we'd been given. I placed my hand on the doorknob but didn't turn it. I stood there, unmoving, for a full 10 seconds. Then I heard it. A small voice, clear, unguarded, just around the corner. I took a step back and peeked around the doorway into the smaller corridor leading to the kids' rooms. My son was standing there talking to his cousin. Both were barefoot, pajamas wrinkled from a long day. His voice was light, casual, like he was sharing a fun fact from school. Grandpa says my dad's not important. I froze. He said it like it was just something you repeat, like the sky is blue or 2 + 2 is 4, like it was a joke he didn't understand but wanted to be part of. His cousin giggled. That's what my mom says too. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand. I walked toward them slowly, gently. Hey, buddy, I said, keeping my voice even. He turned, smiling. Hi, Dad. I crouched down. My knees cracked as I lowered myself to his height. What did Grandpa tell you? I asked softly. He shrugged. That you don't really work, that you just sit around and Mom does all the important stuff. He said it without malice, without awareness. Just a child repeating the words of adults. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I wanted to say, that's not true. I wanted to tell him how many nights I stayed up reviewing contracts, how many hours I'd put into saving projects his grandfather nearly tanked. But all that meant nothing to a boy who just wanted to understand why his grandpa and his mom spoke like that. Behind him, Seraphine appeared. She didn't make eye contact, just placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Time for bed, sweetheart." He looked at me one last time, then turned and followed her down the hall. She didn't look back. The door to his room shut with a soft click. I stayed crouched for a long moment, my knees burning, my chest hollow. It wasn't Mortimer's insults that did it. Not the seat by the kitchen, not the cropped photo, not the missing name in the video. It was that voice, my son's voice, the echo of Mortimer's poison now slipping from my child's lips. He didn't know he'd driven a stake through me. That was the cruelest part. I stood slowly, every joint stiff with more than age. I went into the guest room, shut the door behind me, and leaned against it. No shouting, no tears, just the overwhelming weight of invisibility settling deeper than ever before. If even my own son thought I didn't matter, what was left? The morning air in Chicago always had a bite to it, but that day it felt sharper than usual, like the city itself was bracing for something. I didn't wait for Seraphine to wake. I slipped out quietly, leaving nothing behind but the silence that had become so common between us. Traffic was light. I barely noticed the skyline rushing past the car window. My mind was somewhere else. Last night's words still echoed. My son's voice parroting Mortimer like gospel. It followed me into that elevator, up to the 47th floor of the Halden corporate tower, and didn't let go. The office was nearly empty when I stepped in. A few early risers offered polite nods, no small talk. I was grateful. I wasn't in the mood for, "How was dinner?" or "Did you enjoy the family night?" The floor smelled of citrus polish and old money. The marble tiles gleamed under the fluorescent light, and the glass walls made everything feel transparent. But nothing truly was in this building. Not the motives. Not the loyalty. I walked past my old corner office. It now had someone else's nameplate. I didn't pause. Mortimer's office was unlocked, which was unusual. He didn't trust anyone, not even his assistant. But today, his door was cracked open like an invitation, or a trap. I stepped in, not out of entitlement, but instinct. I'd worked from that desk for years, made decisions that saved millions, drafted the very protocols they now use to ice me out. I figured I'd give myself an hour before anyone noticed, but something caught my eye. A red leather folder lay open on the desk, not tucked away in a drawer, not secured in his safe, just sitting there, waiting. I knew better. I should have walked away. But the damage had already been done. My reputation, my place in this family, my voice. I reached for it. Inside were documents. At first glance, routine, asset audits, departmental charts, funding reallocation summaries. But the third page stopped me cold. It was a transfer of ownership, strategic shares, key holdings in Halden International's shell companies, previously under a discretionary trust managed by me, now reassigned under Liana's control. Seraphine's younger sister, the one Mortimer always referred to as the real strategist in the family, despite her rarely showing up for board meetings. I flipped further. Legal memos, time-stamped and stamped. Emails, carefully selected and printed. Then, my signature. At the bottom of a page I had never seen before. It wasn't just the swoop of my C or the curve of the V. It looked like mine. Down to the slight pressure smudge near the R. But I hadn't touched a pen in any meeting that month. I remembered clearly. I hadn't signed anything, especially not this. I leaned back, heart racing. My fingertips felt numb. They weren't just pushing me out socially. They were rewriting history, legal, financial, strategic history. And they were doing it quietly, with enough polish and pretense that even a forensic audit would hesitate. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Mortimer walked in with his usual calm, charcoal suit crisp, not a strand of silver hair out of place. He didn't seem surprised to find me there. In fact, his expression was somewhere between indulgent and bored. "You're in early," he said casually, adjusting his cufflinks. I held up the folder. "You want to explain this?" He closed the door gently behind him, walked to the wet bar, and poured himself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not coffee, just water, like this was any other morning. "Paperwork moves faster than you do, Calder," he said smoothly, taking a sip. "You always did hesitate." I stared at him, my knuckles white around the folder. "This isn't just business maneuvering, Mortimer. This is criminal." He tilted his head. Big words for someone who never bothered to read what he was signing. "I didn't sign this." He didn't blink. "Then you should have paid more attention. You've been riding this train for 8 years, enjoying the comfort without ever checking the destination." I could feel the pressure in my temples. A vein in my neck pulsed like a metronome ticking toward a breakdown. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the folder. I placed it back on his desk. "I hope to God you're ready for what comes next," I said quietly. Mortimer smiled. "Calder, this empire wasn't built on hope. It was built on leverage. And right now, you don't have any." I left before I could do something I'd regret. In the hallway, everything blurred. Voices, phones ringing, elevator chimes. But my thoughts were crystal clear. This wasn't about bruised pride anymore. They were cutting me out of existence with surgical precision. Contracts, perception, even my own family. I walked into the cold morning air, each breath burning my lungs. They thought they'd buried me under polished stone and notarized lies. But beneath it all, something stirred. Not rage, not panic, clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the first shot. The morning air in Chicago always had a bite to it. But that day it felt sharper than usual, like the city itself was bracing for something. I didn't wait for Seraphine to wake. I slipped out quietly, leaving nothing behind but the silence that had become so common between us. Traffic was light. I barely noticed the skyline rushing past the car window. My mind was somewhere else. Last night's words still echoed. My son's voice, parroting Mortimer like gospel. It followed me into that elevator, up to the 47th floor of the Halden corporate tower, and didn't let go. The office was nearly empty when I stepped in. A few early risers offered polite nods, no small talk. I was grateful. I wasn't in the mood for, "How was dinner?" or, "Did you enjoy the family night?" The floor smelled of citrus polish and old money. The marble tiles gleamed under the fluorescent light, and the glass walls made everything feel transparent. But nothing truly was in this building. Not the motives. Not the loyalty. I walked past my old corner office. It now had someone else's nameplate. I didn't pause. Mortimer's office was unlocked, which was unusual. He didn't trust anyone, not even his assistant. But today, his door was cracked open like an invitation, or a trap. I stepped in, not out of entitlement, but instinct. I'd worked from that desk for years, made decisions that saved millions, drafted the very protocols they now use to ice me out. I figured I'd give myself an hour before anyone noticed, but something caught my eye. A red leather folder lay open on the desk, not tucked away in a drawer, not secured in a safe, just sitting there waiting. I knew better. I should have walked away, but the damage had already been done. My reputation, my place in this family, my voice. I reached for it. Inside were documents. At first glance, routine, asset audits, departmental charts, funding reallocation summaries. But the third page stopped me cold. It was a transfer of ownership, strategic shares, key holdings in Halden International's shell companies, previously under a discretionary trust managed by me, now reassigned under Liana's control. Seraphine's younger sister, the one Mortimer always referred to as the real strategist in the family, despite her rarely showing up for board meetings. I flipped further. Legal memos, time-stamped and stamped, emails, carefully selected and printed. Then, my signature. At the bottom of a page I had never seen before. It wasn't just the swoop of my C or the curve of the V. It looked like mine, down to the slight pressure smudge near the R. But I hadn't touched a pen in any meeting that month. I remembered clearly. I hadn't signed anything, especially not this. I leaned back, heart racing. My fingertips felt numb. They weren't just pushing me out socially. They were rewriting history. Legal, financial, strategic history. And they were doing it quietly, with enough polish and pretense that even a forensic audit would hesitate. I heard the footsteps before I saw him. Mortimer walked in with his usual calm, charcoal suit crisp, not a strand of silver hair out of place. He didn't seem surprised to find me there. In fact, his expression was somewhere between indulgent and bored. "You're in early," he said casually, adjusting his cufflinks. I held up the folder. "You want to explain this?" He closed the door gently behind him, walked to the wet bar, and poured himself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not coffee, just water, like this was any other morning. "Paperwork moves faster than you do, Calder," he said smoothly, taking a sip. "You always did hesitate." I stared at him, my knuckles white around the folder. "This isn't just business maneuvering, Mortimer. This is criminal." He tilted his head. Big words for someone who never bothered to read what he was signing. "I didn't sign this." He didn't blink. "Then you should have paid more attention. You've been riding this train for 8 years, enjoying the comfort without ever checking the destination." I could feel the pressure in my temples. A vein in my neck pulsed like a metronome ticking toward a breakdown. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the folder. I placed it back on his desk. "I hope to God you're ready for what comes next," I said quietly. Mortimer smiled. "Calder, this empire wasn't built on hope. It was built on leverage. And right now, you don't have any." I left before I could do something I'd regret. In the hallway, everything blurred, voices, phones ringing, elevator chimes. But my thoughts were crystal clear. This wasn't about bruised pride anymore. They were cutting me out of existence with surgical precision, contracts, perception, even my own family. I walked into the cold morning air, each breath burning my lungs. They thought they'd buried me under polished stone and notarized lies. But beneath it all, something stirred. Not rage, not panic, clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the first shot. I didn't return to the main dining hall after Mortimer's spectacle. As the executives' murmurs faded into the velvet-lined corridors, I walked in silence toward the far end of the mansion, past paintings of old Halden patriarchs with gold leaf frames and judgmental eyes. I kept my gaze low, not in shame, but to contain the storm building behind my eyes. If I looked up, if I allowed my chest to rise too much, I'd explode. And they would love that. The study door was open. My study, though I doubt anyone in this house still called it that. I stepped inside, turned on the desk lamp, and shut the door behind me. The silence felt unnatural, as if even the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to break. The chair let out a groan as I sat. My hands trembled, not from rage this time, but from exhaustion. My mind had become a battlefield, memories colliding with insults, sacrifices banging against betrayals. A red folder waited for me on the desk, square in the center like a final verdict. No name on the front, no instructions, just sitting there, quietly venomous. I opened it. The document inside was simple in its formatting, brutal in its message. A non-disclosure agreement. It outlined in cold, professional language the terms of my silence. If I signed, I forfeited all claims, financial, strategic, even historical. I would have no right to speak of my involvement with Halden International. No public recounting of the years I spent steering its most difficult mergers, negotiating deals that kept it afloat during the crash, holding together a family that barely tolerated my presence. No credit, no voice, nothing. And at the bottom of the document, a small line waited for my signature. Next to it, Mortimer had already signed, his name etched in ink, steady, bold, unshaken, as if it were already done. His voice rang again in my ears, not loud, not angry, just calmly final. Sign it, Calder. End this cleanly. I stared at the pen beside the folder. My hand moved toward it without my permission. My fingers curled around it, and for a moment the idea of signing, just getting it over with, felt like relief. No more pushing, no more pretending, just quiet. I imagined packing my things, disappearing into some corner of the country where no one whispered my name, no one looked at me with pity, no child repeated the poison their grandfather fed them. Silence began to look like peace. My shoulders sank. The weight of it all finally too much. My fingers touched the paper. That's when I saw it. A glint on the shelf beside the desk. My grandmother's watch. I had almost forgotten I'd left it here. A simple piece, round face, leather band, worn thin from decades of use. It had survived immigration, wars, relocations. It was the only item I carried when I first came to Chicago, with nothing but my degree and a list of numbers I prayed would open doors. She'd given it to me the day I moved away from home. Her hands had been trembling then too, but not from defeat. "Don't let them erase you, Calder," she'd said. "People like us, we don't get second chances at being remembered." That voice. It cut sharper than Mortimer's words ever could. I dropped the pen, hard. It clattered against the desk and rolled off, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I leaned back in the chair, my breath ragged, my heart pounding, not in fear anymore, but something else. I looked down at the NDA, and for the first time I saw it for what it truly was. Not a contract, but a tombstone. They wanted to bury me alive, write me out of the company, the family, the story, turn me into a footnote no one would read. And I had almost let them. I closed the folder slowly, slid it to the edge of the desk, and turned the watch face in my palm. The tick was faint, but steady. I wasn't steady yet, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I stood. The silence in the room didn't feel like defeat anymore. It felt like focus, a cocoon. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that boardroom, not as a beggar, but with something they hadn't counted on. Resolve. The next morning, I didn't shave. I didn't button up the starch white shirt Mortimer insisted all his men at the table wear. I didn't bring a laptop, a folder, or even a pen. I walked into that boardroom with only the weight of 8 years on my back and the watch of a dead woman on my wrist. The same boardroom where I'd once paced the floors until midnight with a phone in one hand and half a deal in the other. Where I cleaned up messes Mortimer had caused, took bullets he wouldn't. Where I once believed I belonged. Now, I wasn't even invited. But I walked in anyway. They were already seated. Mortimer at the head, of course, looking bored as a man sipping tea at a funeral. Seraphine was beside him, silent and still. Her eyes flicked toward me once, then dropped like curtains. Some of the executives turned. Others didn't bother. One or two smirked. I didn't speak right away. I walked slowly around the table, letting the silence work harder than any raised voice ever could, letting them wonder, Was I about to beg, threaten, plead for a seat I never truly had? I reached the head of the table, Mortimer's throne, and stood across from him. He didn't blink, just leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "You're not on the agenda today, Calder." I nodded, then took a breath. "Thank you." Just that, 2 words. A few of them blinked. One chuckled, unsure if I was being sarcastic or pathetic. Mortimer tilted his head slightly. I didn't explain. Not yet. Instead, I let the tension stretch until even the marble walls seemed to listen. "Thank you," I said again, quieter this time, "for finally showing me where I stand." I turned to Mortimer. "Thank you for proving that all the sacrifices, the years I spent in this building, the nights I spent holding up this company while you were out shaking hands and smiling for cameras meant nothing to you. It's clearer now than it ever was before." I let my eyes sweep across the room. I saw memories etched into faces, dinners missed, red-eye flights, deals made at 2 a.m. because I pushed harder when others folded. "Thank you," I continued, this time to Seraphine, though she wouldn't meet my gaze, "for reminding me that silence isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's permission." I saw the flicker in her throat, the kind that happens when you swallow back something sharp. Then I turned to the table as a whole. "And thank you all, sincerely, for confirming what I needed to know, that I never really had a seat here, just a placeholder, just a warm body who happened to marry the wrong daughter and work harder than anyone expected him to." A pause. Longer this time. Then I added, slowly, carefully, "But you also reminded me of something else, that this empire, the one built on pride and perfection and fear, doesn't stand on name alone." Now the room stirred. Tiny movements, papers adjusted, eyes flicked, jaws clenched. I was the one who flew to Dubai when the oil deal nearly collapsed. I was the one who pulled Liana's failed acquisition out of legal hell. I was the one who found the cracks in the logistics model when your so-called experts missed them. They remembered. I saw it. The way Ellis, the CFO, leaned back with a slow exhale. The way Karen's pen stopped tapping. The way Mark, always loyal to whoever held the power, dropped his gaze. Mortimer was stone. "You called me spineless," I said quietly. "A man living off his wife." A short breath. Controlled. "So thank you, Mortimer, for saying it in front of them, for putting it all on the table, because now they have to choose whether they were carried by a coward or protected by someone too quiet for his own good." I stepped away. No further argument, no papers, no demand. And then I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. But as my foot crossed the threshold, I heard it. One chair scraping back, then another, and another. By the time I reached the end of the corridor, the sound of 33 people rising from their seats echoed like thunder behind me. Mortimer's empire was cracking, but he wasn't finished yet. The door had barely stopped swinging from the 33 walkouts when he struck back. Less than 24 hours later, I was summoned, back to the same boardroom. This time, it was Mortimer who stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched with the grin of a man who still believed he could control the fire by walking into it. I walked in alone. No entourage, no backing band of executives. Just me, my quiet breath, and the echo of betrayal still bouncing off the walls. He didn't wait. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mortimer began, waving a crisp folder like it was a holy relic. "Before we give further airtime to theatrics, I thought it was time the board saw the truth." He opened the folder and pulled out a set of papers with flair, sliding them onto the glass tabletop. "Calder," he said almost sweetly, "you've been siphoning funds through off-ledger accounts for personal use. These documents, signed by your own hand, confirm that." The words hit like a slap, not because I believed them, but because I knew he was willing to sink that low. Gasps went around the room. Ellis leaned forward. Karen blinked rapidly. Even Mark, the usual Mortimer puppet, looked rattled. He turned the page toward them with 2 fingers and tapped the signature line. "See for yourself." There it was, my name, in ink, my signature, my supposed betrayal, except I had never signed it. My stomach turned, not from fear, but from the depth of his desperation. This wasn't about removing me anymore. This was character assassination in broad daylight. I didn't move, didn't panic. I let the room digest it, let the suspicion settle like dust on a mirror. And then, calmly, I reached into my jacket and pulled out a much older folder. "Interesting," I said, voice steady, "because I have a version of that same contract dated 6 months earlier, with the original agreement. No diversions, no offshore line items, and notarized, unlike yours." Mortimer's eyes twitched. Just once, just enough. I stepped forward and laid the document beside his. "Check the notary seal. That's Georgia State Official Inc., verified and registered. Yours doesn't even have a witness signature." The silence cracked like ice under weight. Karen leaned in. "Wait, he's right. That seal is legit, and the timestamp's embedded in the notarization ledger. Cross-check it with internal filings," I added. "The audit trail aligns with my version, not his." Mark, who once couldn't blink without Mortimer's approval, suddenly seemed far more interested in my paperwork than his bosses. He muttered, "That's federal offense territory if yours is real." "It is," I said. "And what he's holding up, that's a felony." Mortimer's mouth tightened. "You think they'll believe a man who married into power and got tossed out?" "No," I said calmly. "They'll believe a man who didn't forge legal documents in front of 24 witnesses." A beat. Then Ellis, the CFO, slowly stood. "Mortimer, is this real? Did you fabricate this?" Mortimer slammed a fist against the table. "This man was nothing before I gave him a place here. Nothing. He bagged groceries at a corner store before Seraphine took pity on him." He was unraveling. "All of you, don't forget that," he barked. "He was a charity case, and you're following him?" One executive whispered, "You gave him a seat, but he earned the floor beneath it." Another added, "He saved our Tokyo deal. We'd be out $94 million if he hadn't stepped in." Then a third voice, this time from someone I never thought would speak, Liana. "Dad," she said slowly, "you made your point. But if this document is forged, that's not Calder's shame. That's yours." For a second, Mortimer looked like a man caught without clothes, red-faced, cornered. But even now, his voice carried weight. "You're making a mistake siding with him." "No," I said. "You made the mistake thinking this empire was yours alone." And then I turned to the others. "You were right. I was nothing when I came here, but you built your empire on that nothing. You leaned on me. You bled me dry. And now, I'm the crack in the wall you can't patch." Silence. A silence that didn't belong to Mortimer anymore. He looked around as if searching for someone to still be on his side. But the room had shifted, not with cheers, not with applause, with something deeper. Conviction. Mortimer had been unmasked, but I knew one truth. Empires don't die quietly. The boardroom emptied slowly that day. People whispered, documents were gathered in haste, and even the walls seemed to recoil from what they'd witnessed. As I stepped outside the skyscraper into the cool afternoon air, a strange calm settled over me. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter, more personal. It was over, not the war, but my part in theirs. The news broke before I reached the street corner. Headlines lit up. Halden CEO under investigation for fraud. Empire shaken after document forgery scandal. Insiders exit amid legal fallout. The empire I had helped build with careful hands and long nights was now unraveling faster than anyone expected. I didn't watch the interviews. I didn't call reporters. I didn't even respond to the flood of emails from legal firms, media outlets, and former business partners hungry for sound bites. Let them tell the story however they wanted. I had said what I needed to say. 2 words. Thank you. I caught a cab, gave my address, just a small, furnished apartment in a quiet corner of the city, and let the rest of the world buzz around without me. Inside, the apartment was dim. No portraits on the walls, no marble counters or silent housekeepers, just me and a single cardboard box I hadn't touched in months. It had been sealed the day Mortimer told me I had 5 minutes to leave, and I never bothered opening it. Until now. I sat on the worn sofa, pulled the tape loose, and lifted the lid. A few shirts, a coffee mug, a leather notebook creased at the corners, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, the old fountain pen. I hadn't thought about that pen in years. Mortimer once mocked me in front of the team for still using it. "Outdated," he'd said, smirking as he clicked his gold Mont Blanc. "You might as well sign contracts with a feather." But that pen, it was a gift. From my mother. Back when things were simple, before boardrooms and betrayals, she'd said, "Build something with this, not for money, for pride." I turned it over in my fingers. It still had weight. That night, alone under a dim lamp, I signed my first contract as an independent consultant with that same pen. No ceremony, no champagne, just quiet commitment and a clean start. I didn't need a throne to lead. I didn't need a title to matter. In the weeks that followed, the fallout deepened. Mortimer's name became toxic. Stock prices tumbled. Investigations escalated. He appeared once on a late-night news segment, red-faced and defensive, then vanished from public view. Whispers of offshore accounts, falsified audits, and misused retirement funds followed. I never commented, never gloated. Seraphine never reached out. The divorce papers came in a sleek envelope, signed, sealed, with no letter inside. I signed them too. Same pen, steady hand. Some friends disappeared with her. People I once had dinners with, toasted deals with, called in the dead of night when the market was bleeding, gone. Silence has a way of revealing what noise once disguised, but not all left. The 33 who stood with me, they stayed. Some sent quiet messages, others asked to meet. 3 of them offered to join me in starting something new. Leaner, cleaner, built not on legacy, but on trust. We had no office yet, no capital injection, no polished brochures, just shared truth. And that was more than I'd had in years. Some nights I still wake up startled, the ghost of Mortimer's voice echoing in my mind. A spineless man living off his wife doesn't deserve this seat. But it fades faster now. Because the seat never defined me. The silence that followed. That's what shaped me. That's where I found myself. I still carry scars. I still walk a little slower past luxury stores, not because I can't afford them, but because I remember what it cost to belong to a world that never truly saw me. But I'm not angry. I'm awake. And as I sit by my apartment window, watching the lights of a city that once tried to bury me, I realize something. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for freedom. And sometimes, freedom is the sharpest revenge of all.